Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 8. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone again for liking, sharing, and commenting. All your support allows us to continue to bring on experts and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. And in this week's episode, I'm joined by a fellow Highland Games competitor, coach, and consultant, Tyler Valencia. Tyler is the president of the Kinesiology Institute for Performance Specialists, better known as KIPS, which is an online and live training platform for personal trainers that offer certification courses, online CEUs, resources, and much more. He's also the host of the KIPS Personal Trainer Application Podcast, as well as a current PhD candidate with a focus in health and human performance. He's a former track and field athlete himself and is now competing nationally in the Highland Games as a lightweight competitor. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get into the game with Tyler Valencia. What's going on, everybody? I'm joined today by my good friend and fellow Highland Game competitor, Tyler Valencia. He's the president of the Kinesiology Institute for Performance Specialists, better known as KIPS, and Kettlebell Concepts Training. He's a former track and field athlete and sprinter, now turned national level Highland Games athlete in the lightweight class with me, and as actually a current PhD candidate, which is awesome, with a focus in health and human performance, right?
That's correct.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to have you on, man. It's been good chatting. We haven't seen each other in a while, so I appreciate you coming on the show today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, so I wanted to kind of get into it a little bit and first start off how you kind of got in the strength game, like what sports you played growing up, what led you to actually competing in Highland Games, like from your track and field background, what kind of piqued your interest and everything?
Yeah, so like growing up, I played a variety of sports. I mean, I grew up in a beach city where everybody played volleyball. Like that was something that after school, so even after track practice, friends would come over. I used to have a volleyball net in my backyard. And so we would play volleyball for hours. During the summer, volleyball hours. But I played soccer. The way that we used to play soccer was actually with ASO soccer. But like all my friends were on it. It was all of us. So it was a great time, a way to, hang out with your buddies, play in a competitive league, all that good stuff. But I ran track. I was actually a jumper. So I used to do long jump, triple jump, high jump, and I usually also do the 100-meter sprint. And that was actually, I'll say, a way to also hang out with my friends. A lot of my buddies were on the track team. And it wasn't really till the last year, my senior year, that I started to take it serious. My dad had hired a strength coach for me, and that was actually part of the, I'll say, turn for me. He showed me what hard work was, showed me how to properly train. And I mean, that combined with my injury history. I mean, when I was younger, I had tons of injuries. I've broken both my ankles when I was younger. I actually broke my hip. I had shoulder bursitis, all types of things as a teen that kind of turned my, I'll say, my hobby of weightlifting. I started in 7th grade weightlifting. I remember my dad bought a bench press, put it in the garage. And ever since then, I've always been into having like a garage gym. And so fast forward to my senior year, I have a strength coach. We're doing lifting 3 days a week. We're doing technique drills. And that year for track and field, I actually ended up winning the most improved athlete on the team. And I was, at the time, a higher ranked jumper for my league. And what unfortunately happened was when we had our league event at the week before, I actually strained my hamstring. And it was terrible timing. And I'll say that I did learn through it too, what goes into the mental aspect of injury and having to deal with that because it's tough. You put a whole good season together. You're ranked high. You have an opportunity to place in your league, and to get that injury at the week before, your Bay League, championships and all that kind of stuff. It was tough. But, what sparked me with the Highland Games was I used to own a boot camp company in Long Beach, California. And obviously I'm not Scottish. I mean, if you're watching this video, I'm not Scottish. I'm half Filipino. And a boot camp member, who's actually Scottish, he was like, hey, I'm going to do these things called the Highland Games. And he would bring stuff after the evening boot camp. So he'd bring like a shot put, he'd bring a kettlebell, and he would, be practicing at the park that we were at. And after weeks, he'd be like, hey, come on, try it, try it out. And I'd be like, what, maybe. And so one day I just decided just to listen, just see what he does. And, I threw the shot put, threw the kettlebell over the branch, which usually like everybody does. And then he convinced me to come meet up with him on a Saturday to practice. And he had made his own makeshift caber with like just nailing together wood and whatnot. Nice. And so, we were doing like the makeshift hammer with just the sledgehammer. So eventually that turned into, hey, there's a competition coming up in Long Beach. And since I lived in Long Beach, I was like, okay, I'll come. And I did the novice class. And then I decided to do another local one, novice at Costa Mesa. And I think the next year I did Long Beach again. So I didn't really dive into it. And then I had that decision. After you do 3 novices, you get the opportunity to choose. They don't let you do novice anymore. So you can choose lightweight, or you can do, C class. And at the time, I think I was around like 187 pounds. And I was still doing endurance run, like low endurance runs. Like I was into doing like the mud runs and that kind of stuff, and not really training specifically for the Highland Games. And so I did my first lightweight class competition, and then I think I got 4th. I did get 4th. And I was just like, man, I want to win. I want to actually do this. And so that kind of changed things for me with the Highland Games. I learning more how to power lift, getting more into the technique with your deads, your squats, your bench, and that kind of sparked things. And I mean, that later that year, even though it was a smaller competition, I ended up getting 2nd in a lightweight competition up in Ventura. But that's kind of the start into lightweight and also the Highland Games for me.
Yeah, that's cool. It's pretty much the same way I kind of got introduced to it. You don't have to be Scottish, though. I mean, I'm definitely the Scottish's enemy. I'm as Irish as you could probably get, but no, that's how everybody starts in Highland Games. I feel like it's just crude instruments, just whatever implements you can kind of find lying around. I think any of my weights were actual kettlebells. I went to Home Depot. I got some U-bolts and some chains. Mm-hmm. I cut a single, a double, a triple. I had no idea what the lengths were. And I was throwing weird kettlebells, and it was awkward. And I was like, all right, I should probably buy something by now. But I like that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the difference, I feel like, between making that jump from the amateur to being able to compete. You buy the implements, you get into it. All of a sudden you have a garage full of the implements. You got your WOB, you got your weight for distance, you find your rocks. I was fortunate enough, I actually got mine from like landscape stores. And I remember like once I got a good rock, I remember like going to the landscape store and I'm like looking at like the bins of rocks, and the guy comes up, he's like, oh, like, what can I help you with? I'm like, this might sound weird, but I need a rock. He's like, just one? And I was like, yeah. Is there any way that you can bring this bin over to the scale? And so he brought the bin, he gets out the lift, brings this bin over to the scale. And I'm literally standing there weighing like rocks, seeing like it's like 24, 20, 23.6, just trying to find that 22-pound rock. And then what was kind of cool was once that finished, he's like, did you find the one? I was like, yeah. I was like, how much, like, what do I go pay for this? He's like, just go. I was like, what? He's like, just take it. It's only one rock. And, but that's how I got like my favorite rock that I have right now.
That's nuts. All my friends would make fun of me every time I'd go to like Target or any grocery store, they have the landscape ones between the little barriers where you park. And
Yeah.
I'm searching in there for a nice smooth one. I've got my
Hmm.
luggage scale in my truck ready to go. I was like, I'm prepared. And
Yeah, you never know.
that's how you collect. It's fun to collect all this stuff, and it's cool to kind of see how you actually getting your own kind of strength coach, and like with your dad getting them for you and working your way through
Hmm.
high school. It introduced you not only to competing in a new sport and working on some of those issues you had, because I think I'm the same way as you. I didn't break my hip, but I dealt with a lot of injuries growing up, and it was a big reason for me actually wanting to get involved in coaching and help other people kind of not have all the shortfalls that I did, so they can actually have a longer career.
Yeah.
So it's fitting from your Beach State days and playing volleyball that you ended up going to Long Beach State. Did you know, like, as soon as you enrolled in college there, that this is the career path you wanted to do? Like, I wanted to be involved in health and performance based stuff when you initially got it started.
So I'll say it's an interesting topic just because I was actually discussing this with my wife recently. And I mean, I'm one of those people that any mistakes that I've made in my past, just try to learn from them, try to see where I can grow from them. Because I didn't start as a kinesiology major. I started actually in business. So my first 2 years of college, I was doing business. And I got to actually a point where I completed all of the prerequisites to do a business major, and I got to a point where I just hated it. The last semester, I had like my calculator out constantly. I had stats, I had calculus, I had macroeconomics, I had accounting, and I just hated it. And so, with that, I was like, I don't love this. I want to make a change. I'd always consistently exercised, always been into playing sports. And so what I did is actually I decided to go back home, go to community college for, I think it was a year. And I decided to get all my prereqs done for kinesiology. Just do it cheap, just get it done. And then that's when I transferred to Long Beach, where I completed my degree in kinesiology. So it was a little bit longer in terms of the path taken for it. But I would say that I'm definitely happy in how much I learned from it. And there are actually points too where I would say that I wasn't planning to do what I do now with education and the occasional coaching here and there. I really, for a period, wanting to do actually like sports management. I was into, the business end of it. And that's probably where my passion for also the business end of running my own business or helping others with the consulting I do, that's probably where that comes from as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that's where you kind of started off. I was the same way, but I mean, it was either military or college, and I kind of, when I looked at what I wanted to do for the military, I got disqualified for a medical condition. So
Hmm.
I was like, all right, I'll go to college. And originally I'd been shadowing some athletic trainers, and that's what I wanted to do. And within day one, I realized that that was not what I wanted. So I think within that day, I switched from athletic training, switched my major, met the head strength coach at Salisbury, and I started interning right from there. So I was
Nice.
like, all right, this is a better career path. I didn't want to be on the injury side of it. But
Yeah.
that's a great segue, because even though you found out you didn't want to actually be maybe doing sports administration or be on the business side, you still got some prerequisites under your belt, and you dipped your toe in the water to actually understand that. And now you've actually created your own business, and KIPS is like a great online resource, and you guys do not only consulting but educational information videos. It's a great online platform that you guys have created. Can you
Thank you.
speak a little bit on that, and like all the information that you guys provide? How the company kind of come about, and what are you actually trying to accomplish with it?
For sure. For sure. So to go back to where kind of a lot of this started was my last year in college for my internship, my corporate side internship I did. I started with an educational company, one that makes online education. They're one of, I'll call it the top 10 educational companies out there for personal trainers. They have a certified personal trainer program. And there that's actually where I started working after I graduated. So I graduated and they offered me a full-time position and I took it. I mean, that's a side that you kind of wonder how people get into the educational side of the industry. And while I worked there, that's actually where I learned a lot of the skills that I utilize now. So with building websites, making education, so filming, editing, making manuals, all that kind of stuff. I learned a lot of those skills there. The person that I worked under, he became my mentor. He taught me a lot. And it's really those skills that helped me get my next position. I became a vice president of a different company. And after working there, I wasn't utilizing a lot of the skills. And so after 6 months, that's when I decided to start KIPS. And I went back to what I was good at with making courses. And the first month off, so the time between leaving my good paying job and starting KIPS, there was 1 month. And I cranked out 3 online courses in that time span. And it was with, 2 other contractors at the time, but continued to grow from there. So starting different programs. And right now we have 10 online programs and we do live workshops as well.
Nice.
But really in this time span, so this 4.5 years that I've been working on KIPS, working on different partnerships. So that's where Kettlebell Concepts came in. I always knew that I wanted to have a partnership with a kettlebell company. I think it's a great segue for companies to get to, I'll say, mainstream in terms of mainstream fitness and the trainers out there. Kettlebell is one of those things that you find in every single gym. So why not have a partnership with a kettlebell educational company? And right now, and since the pandemic started, actually, a lot of what we do is making tutorials for individuals that aren't good with tech. I'll say not a lot of fitness people know what a good camera is or know how to make a blog post or know how to, like, what microphones, all these kinds of things. I mean, if you're watching the video of this, you'll see that my video quality is a little bit different. I might have a little bit of a lag right now because of the quality of camera there, but I have a 4K camera that I'm utilizing for this Zoom recording, and not many people know how to utilize these types of resources. So a lot of these tutorials that we've been making are free, and it's a way to help people throughout this pandemic. Because if you look at the other companies out there, and not to talk too negatively about them, but they've stayed pretty consistent with, it's just the same kind of content they're making. But what are those resources that can help people? And I guess that kind of goes into the direction of KIPS too. And I've told people many times that when I started KIPS, it was to, I'll say I made the mistake of just trying to make the same education that other companies are making. But you can't do that. When you have a smaller budget and you don't have as many resources, say as like a NASM or an SCA or an ACE, companies like that, you can't do the same thing. They'll just wipe you out with their marketing budget easily. So I switched the direction of the education we were making, and it really has been, I'll say, a big decision that changed how we started to grow, sales going up, all those kinds of things. And of course, I still want to keep some of the traditional items in there. The way that I always explain it is I want KIPS to be right in the middle. So if we look at the educational spectrum, we'll say that a lot of the traditional ones are on this side. So we got your NSCAs, your NASMs, your ACEs, and then at the other end, I will say is on it. They're kind of a out there kind of company. They put on courses, all that kind of stuff, great quality with what they do. They got a big budget and whatnot, but I want KIPS to be right in the middle in terms of, like, we do offer, group exercise certification, but at the same time, we offer a steel club course. So things that you're not used to seeing, because I think those are things that people, when they see them, they learn more about them. Like, oh, wow, those are cool tools. I can utilize those with my clients. And it's a way to, continually push these items on the traditional mainstream education spectrum and see what people can utilize. Because there's more than just what we see in front of us in terms of, and I know that that's something that you and I will talk about, later on, but there's more than just the dumbbells, the barbells, and what you traditionally see in a gym. There's so much more out there. And the way that I was taught about it is, as long as you have the appropriate goal, and they'll say all the limitations or any restrictions in place, as long as you have the appropriate goal with any tool, no matter what it is, you can utilize it. That was something that I learned from a very young, I'll say, not a young age, but when I was just starting in the industry, somebody that had helped me in my career. And this individual actually recently passed away, but he was one of the best strength coaches. He was a strength coach for the Thailand, I think, Olympic lifting team, just a phenomenal powerlifting coach. And he was actually somebody that helped Martins Lichis when he was going for World's Strongest Man. And he was somebody, you think about it, he came from the powerlifting world. And he's telling me that no matter what tool it is, and not, moving away from strongman or powerlifting, you think about the powerlifting mentality. It's okay, if we're just going to do X, Y, and Z, that's it. Everything else sucks. But he's telling me, no, you can use suspension training. You can use kettlebells. You can use anything. Just you got to have the appropriate goal for it.
I like that. I mean, that was one things that we talked about when we even first met, and even some of the stuff that you brought with you to the field. I think it was the first time we competed against each other, or the second time. And it was interesting to see all the tools, and I like it. I mean, like I compete in strongman and Highland games, and most people don't understand either of them. And they're vastly different implements that you would normally see in a normal facility. And using them requires a lot of different athletic abilities to actually throw an implement, lift up an implement, and stuff like that. And they're great tools to be able to teach either clients or athletes alike. I definitely want to touch on that stuff, but I wanted to keep going like with your company and everything. And I like the approach you took. Obviously, there's no way to compete with those multi-million-dollar ones. And honestly, you do see it. I fall victim to not knowing technology and stuff like definitely as well as you do. And the courses that you guys have, they're not just regurgitated like a lot of them, like you see with normal personal training ones. And you guys target towards giving educational information, not just to athletes, but to those actual coaches so that they can provide more information and teaching them kind of how to fish, which is great. You touched on too some of the mistakes that you made when you kind of first started. When you actually got through the process, like what were some of the mistakes that you kind of had when you were actually trying to brand it, and actually outside of actually making a company, but when you were trying to promote it and show it off as more of less than just Tyler like Valencia, but as now this is KIPS, this is my brand, like this is what we stand for. What were some of the things that you think that people need to initially understand before they go into starting their own venture or business or company like that?
It's a good question. And I will say that you got to start with, do you want to build a brand or do you want to build yourself? I mean, that's the number one thing that I always point out. If you go to the KIPS social media accounts, I don't think you can find a picture of me on it. And a lot of it is the people that I have on the KIPS podcast, the KIPS personal training podcast. They're clips from there. It's clips from the courses that we have. It's all the instructors that are part of it, because I want to build the brand. I want to build these courses. I want to show that I'll say the guests that we can attract for the podcast. And that's different than, I'll say, just building yourself as the brand. And I mean, I think that's the first part that you got to go at. And I think that's always been part of actually my personality. I don't like to show off myself. Was kind of funny is before this week, and recently I've been posting a little bit more on my Instagram just because I just launched a new company. But before that, I think there was actually a month that I didn't post anything. And it's because I just don't care. It's bad to say that I don't care, but like I'm busy with other things that I just don't go back to my own personal account. But like I have to post for other accounts that either I consult for or that I own. And so those take priority over myself. And a lot of on my own account is just my Highland Games training. Occasionally I'll post stuff about KIPS, or if I'm on a podcast, or if I'm on a panel discussion, stuff like that. And so, finding what works for your own personality and those types of things can really help shape your direction for your business, because you don't say, even though you do want to get out of your own comfort level and your own wheelhouse, there's a lot of different things that go into, I'll say, building a company there. And that I just gave this advice to somebody actually the other day. And I just said, if you want to build your brand, you want to eventually have your own company and learn the technology, you got to start a company. You just got to start it because you learn so much from it. Earlier, I mentioned that out of college, I started my own boot camp company. This is while I worked for an educational company. So not only was I working 40 hours, but I started my own boot camp company. And I learned so much from that process, how to build a website, how to start a business, how to market a business, what SEO is, all these things that you don't really think about, but they take a ton of time. But all those things help pay off with my career, but also with starting KIPS and then also launching this new company. And so I literally just told the person, you just start a business, just see what you learn from it and see what you can find out, because you'll learn so much about yourself, but also you'll learn so many skills that are part of it. So that if somebody asks you, oh, how do you start a business? You can be like, oh, I know how to do that.
I like it. I mean, the biggest thing, I just kind of went through the stuff, like I taught myself how to build a website.
Yep.
Obviously doing this now and figuring out ways to actually podcast and reach out to other people and all the audio and visual stuff. I mean, I'm pretty crude when I put my training programs together and all the videos and stuff. So this is definitely outside of my wheelhouse, but honestly, the biggest thing was to do it. And you have to put a deadline on it and just learn on the go, because honestly, with my own training programs, with my own training and coaching, if I don't look back in 6 months and just hate everything I did and want to change it, then there's a problem. And you should always be trying to advance, and you're never going to perfect it. So you have to want that same desire and finish the process as you go along. But if you just keep putting it off, you'll never actually do any of it, which is,
Agreed.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. But that's kind of a great segue. Like you were talking about it, you started the company while you were already working full time. And on top of that, I mean, you've got family obligations, you've got other stuff, you're working on your own educational things and continuing ed, and you're training and you're competing. So like I wanted to go back, obviously that's what it comes down to, like finding a way to juggle all those things. And the big reason for the podcast is I want to talk to people that are training and coaching, people that are competing and coaching, because those are the people that are continuing to push the boundaries on both sides. And you're a competitive Highland Games athlete.
Thank you.
So, I mean, so on top of all that stuff, how has your own training influenced either the educational material you're putting out or the clientele you're working with? Do you use any sort of throwing implements? Do you use some of the landmine work and everything that you personally do? Does that carry over to your athletes or some of the information you do? Like what's your thought process with the type of training you do and the type of training that you provide for your clients?
I would say that some of it stems from what I mentioned with having the appropriate goal, but also doing stuff different, and not just doing stuff different just to be different. Of course, you want to have a purpose behind it, but a lot of what I do when I do train people. So a good example is the last time that I trained individuals was the end of last year. So end of 2019. And so I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona. And when I moved out here, I didn't have any plans to train anybody, just because it wasn't really something that I was like, okay, I need to find a gym to train people at. I just wasn't part of my plan. KIPS was growing, kettlebell concepts, all these types of things that I was just going to focus on, all those types of things, continue to grow them. But with moving out here, a good buddy of mine, he became the head coach of a baseball team out here. And he's like, hey, I love what you do with your training and whatnot. Can you get my team up to speed? And he just became the coach. He wanted to do stuff different. And the team was the previous year, they came in last place. And he's like, they need a shift. They need to do things different. And so a lot of what I implemented, of course, I'm a big believer in the foundations, the basics, all that kind of stuff. I do all that kind of stuff still. I still do my squats, my front squats, my back squats, my deadlifts, my sumo deadlifts, my cleans, my snatches. I still do the foundation stuff, but I incorporate a lot of landmine work. I'm probably one of the few Highland gamers that uses Viper Pro. And the way that I utilize that stuff, I'll say has kept me healthier. It keeps my timing better, but also I will say it helps strengthen my core. I think so. I'll say a small joke about this is that a lot of the podcasts or talks that I go on more recently have been about technology and whatnot, but my background is in exercise science and my master's is in sport performance. And so it's always nice to talk about these things. But so going back to the landmine variations I do, because I don't just use the landmine in terms of, okay, I'm just going to stand in front of it and I'm just going to do a sagittal press with it. I utilize a lot of rotation into it. And something that we can dive into right now is recently I saw a post on Twitter that was talking about the use of medicine balls for rotational power. And in the years that I've used medicine balls, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't use medicine balls. Don't try to, continually use them for your program. I think there's a great use in them, especially in the amount of how many times you can program medicine ball use with athletes. But comparing medicine ball use, and then once I discovered using the landmine for rotational power, it is just exponentially higher in terms of the payoff that I've had with it. I was using medicine ball work for years, 2-3 years, and not really seeing the kind of jumps that I had once I started utilizing the landmine. So I do a lot of rotational presses with them where I'll start 90 degrees from the landmine, from the point of access, or I'll start facing away from it and do presses where I'll land in a snatch position. So all these things, when you think about them, coordination, timing, power, all the things that you think of in sport performance, this drill or this exercise has a part of it. And so, and I have to preface this by saying that I use them in heavy landmine rotational presses. And of course you should program your athlete appropriately. You're not going to start them with 40, 50 pounds, maybe just starting with just the barbell, just to get that coordination and timing down, or starting them with a 10-pound plate. But that type of work that goes into, I'll say, rotational power, it's something that when I do it, I know that I'm using my hips. I'm using all these things that when I go do heavyweight for distance, or when I go do even, I'll say WOB, I feel a difference. And it translates for me into other lifts. So this pandemic, I did a block where I just utilized the landmine, and I stopped doing my hang snatches, which I love to do hang snatches. I do close grip hang snatches. I think they're fun to do. I think there is some payoff to weight over bar, but I stopped doing those. I stopped doing cleans, and I just did my landmine work. After that block finished and I went back into doing some cleans, I had almost an immediate PR in my clean, and my 1 rep clean, almost an immediate clean. I did actually, I think, hit a PR, and I almost had a 5-pound PR with it. So to see that type of correlation without touching a barbell for doing cleans in what I think was maybe a 2-3 month period where I just didn't incorporate those, to me that shows, I'll say, a good payoff. But when I go to the field too, that's where I see the payoff in it too. Just the timing is there. I'm not having to take 3 weeks for a transitional phase in order to get back into throwing and getting my timing down, getting my footwork down. I think something that, you've seen in person, I'm a big believer in the footwork, the small things. After my first year making it to lightweight nationals, I thought that I needed to take things back to zero with my weight for distance, which is the event where we throw a weight out in front of us, we spin around, we throw it. I just knew my footwork wasn't going to cut it if I wanted to go into the 60s. So I literally started from scratch, and I just started working on the fundamentals, getting my one turns down, getting all the pieces dialed in. And I still haven't gotten past that point. 3 years later, I still haven't gotten past it because I'm still trying to get the foundations down for it. But I'm finally seeing those types of payoffs with this type of work. I think a term that not many strength coaches maybe have heard of yet is with the loaded movement training, which is a Viper Pro term. And with it, it's essentially you're using, a load to essentially move through space. But the way, I don't know if many people know what the Viper Pro is, essentially looks like a log press. But moving with the load through space, it's multiplanar. You're having to essentially, I'll say, protect your core, protect your spine in a way that translates to movement, translates to athletic performance. And so to talk about those things on this podcast, but even with other Highland game athletes, sometimes they're like, what? Why don't you just deadlift? Why aren't you just doing those things? And I'll say I'm switching in terms of my thought process, that I believe there are more beneficial movements or exercises than just doing those. Like, it's the stigma that's attached to it, though, that
Right.
A lot of the athletes in this just believe, oh, I have to have a 400, I have to have a 500-pound deadlift. And it's like, you don't. You can do so many other things. You can feel better. You can move better. Isn't that what you want on the day that you're competing?
Yeah, it makes almost too much sense. And like, I don't want to take away from all the points you made, but we've had that discussion, either both of us together or in groups of other guys. Like, there's no cookie cutter approach to it, and comparing numbers is for a sport like Highland Games or anything else where there's a numerical value placed on how you actually rank.
Mm-hmm.
That to put any sort of ranking or emphasis on a different lift or movement outside of what you're actually competing in doesn't make any sense. I know for a fact that we've competed against one guy before, and he deadlifts almost close to 700 pounds. Okay, yeah, he's a good thrower, but the guy that got second does not deadlift that much. I guarantee it. So what works for some person doesn't work for another. And I like that you guys take, and like within your own training and what you do with the KIPS system, you guys take a different approach, not only to functional strength and the core, which I know is a buzzword, both of them, but with either the Viper Pro or kettlebells or anything, like even within my own training, like I incorporate a lot of strongman stuff because I still compete in it. And the benefit that I get from sandbag training or lifting odd objects or pressing things or carrying things, I know it directly translates over to my normal powerlifting and Olympic movements. And if those are doing well and I can balance that approach, I know that I'm still going to see gains and benefit from that when I actually go to throw, which is awesome. And I don't want to discredit all that stuff. And you said another good point too about building your footwork and everything for an event, and understanding that, all right, there's a starting point for landmine training. There's a starting point for actually integrating this stuff in there. And it doesn't just start with the finished approach with as much weight as possible on it. There's a technique, there's a pattern to it. And if you actually want to see progress, that there's a starting point. So with that in mind, for anybody considering like working with landmines, steel maces, kettlebells, and some of the other things that you guys offer within your courses, what are some key things that you think from anybody, from an athlete or just a general population client, what are some things they need to consider when they actually are considering putting this into their program?
I'm probably biased because I'm a firm believer in it, but education. You got to have the education to be able to utilize these things. With education and learning these tools, it's the safety component. I mean, I'm not a strongman competitor. I've actually tended to stay away from that stuff, even though I used to go to a strongman gym. I would rarely do some of the stuff because my mind was just too focused on the Highland Games. And even though it's fun, it's great, it's fun to do. And I see the payoff with the Highland Games. I didn't do any of it, but there's a learning curve to it. And so to just try to pick something up, whether it's an Atlas stone or it's a farmer's walk, there is a starting point. There's the safety component. So the education for the general pop or an athlete, seek out somebody that can show you it properly, because that's going to make sure that you don't get injured and that you do utilize it in a safe manner. And that goes the same for coaches too. You're not going to just pick some random thing up that you don't know about. Hey, athletes, come pick up this sandbag. You want to know what's the technique, even why you're using it. And I think that that's the component with education that we often miss out on is the why. They want to show a tool. They want to show, okay, here's a couple cues about why. What's the science behind it that we often miss out on? And I think it's great that you mentioned core and functional training, because these terms that have been around for years, I mean, they've been dragged through the mud and they get crapped on all the time, excuse my language. But it's something that you should talk about with your athletes and explain what these terms mean. How are you defining it? Because that then goes into your programming. If you are using these terms, how are you defining it? Where is that going to pay off with certain lifts? Because it's part of it. It's part of the industry.
No, you touched on a good point. I mean, it's pretty easy to do the what and the how, and the where is wherever you're at. So the biggest thing though with education, I see it with athletes, they, in this day and age, even general population, I'm assuming they want to know the why behind it. Like, why am I doing this? And you guys provide a great educational resource so that, yes, this is what you do it. These are the steps you do it to do it safely. This is how you progress it. And this is the implement we're going to be using. But why? How does this actually benefit you? Where you see sort of the issues with this, and just them completely understanding where the rationale behind it and where you're coming from, which is awesome. And then, I mean, KIPS, you guys do that in blog form. You guys do it with the podcasts and the KIPS, like personal training application. And then all of your guys' educational videos. But personally, like, where do you kind of sharpen the sword? Like, what do you do for your own educational resources as an athlete, as a coach, as a person? Like, what are some of your favorite resources or coaches you lean on and follow?
So I'll say that I haven't had as much time as, in terms of being able to attend workshops as much. I did attend, I'll give you a shout out. I did attend the Fresno State online clinic, which was great. I watched more than just your presentation. And I've told people before that I thought it was one of the most professionally put together presentation online clinic that I've seen, in terms of how it was with the DJ, or sorry, not the MC that essentially introduced people and whatnot. It was great, well put together.
Appreciate it.
But in terms of my own education and who I look to and whatnot, I'm a big fan of Eric Cressy, and I know that he's a big fan of the medicine ball. And I do take some of the stuff that I've learned from him and apply some of those concepts, and his ability to break down the shoulder complex and why you do certain movements, certain exercises, and safety for the shoulder complex. I think that, and this is something that I will sometimes say in workshops, is social media can be a good tool to get ideas. I've learned a lot of the things that I utilize with the Landmine and Viper Pro from Instagram. But at the same time, of course, and this probably goes with my educational background, I'm going to see what the credentials of the person is. I'm not just going to be like, oh, that looks like a cool exercise. I'm going to go try it. I want to know who the person is, and look at their credentials. Is it really founded in science, or is it really safe? I think there's one account called 3D Athletes. I think that's what it's called. I follow them, and I will definitely save a lot of the posts that they make, because I believe in what they're doing. I've implemented them with the last group of athletes that I trained, the baseball athletes. I incorporated quite a few of the drills, the reaction timing drills, the loaded movement timing drills that I utilized. A lot of those were a part of that programming. Let me think. Who else is there? I used to be into YouTube and finding coaches on there. I've kind of moved away from, don't get me wrong, he still makes good stuff. Kelly Starrett, the quality's good, but I've kind of moved away from that. And I kind of pick and choose maybe sometimes if I watch a topic, and not because it's bad content, but I think that sometimes as coaches, we got to remember what the background is for that person. A physical therapist is going to have a different approach than a athletic trainer, or a strength coach, or a personal trainer, or a biomechanist. They all have different approaches based off their educational experience. Right. So his approach as a physical therapist is going to probably be different than as a strength coach. But and it's not kind of where my mindset is in terms of the physical therapy approach, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's founded in science. But other accounts, I'd say that there's another one similar to the 3D athletes, and I forgot the name again. I think it's like Real Athletics, but he does similar stuff with the landmine, with different bands and whatnot, with variable resistance, which I think that they're good examples. And as any coach, I mean, you got to try them on yourself first. How are you going to cue it? How are you going to program it? And how are you going to implement it on a large scale if you haven't tried it yourself? I mean, those are all things that you got to think about with this training.
No, I love that. I mean, you hit the nail on the head too with that. I haven't heard of 3D athletes, but I mean, there's tons of resources available. And like you said, you need to see kind of where that person's coming from. What are their credentials? Obviously, there's a lot of people that are in this field, and there's a lot of different opinions with it. So just to see the different ideas that come up, and you might not necessarily use it, but to find your own spin on it, it might create a new way that you think is more appropriate. But at the end of the day, the best thing is you're trying it. Like you said, like you understand the cues, how to program it. Is this effective for this athlete? Is this even effective for this population? Like
Exactly.
You understand that's the number one thing that you actually have to do. And being an athlete as yourself and as a coach, like that makes it even all that much better. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, and so we end the show with any training, good training session, a finisher. So we got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and I know it's not normally Highland games, but we'll do, instead of overtime, we might have a last throw. So
Let's hear it.
we'll call it a challenge caber for today.
I like it.
So take as much time as you want, or you can fire them off as quick as you want. And I think I know the first one, but biggest influence in either strength conditioning or coaching, and biggest influence in Highland games.
Biggest influencing in coaching is probably the gentleman I mentioned earlier that passed away. His name's Tom DeLong. He actually passed away in the last year. Again, great strength coach, great power lifter. I worked with him on the educational side of the industry. So when I worked for a company called Nesta and NCCPT, just I'll say always someone willing to help others. I could send him film of me powerlifting anytime, or anytime I posted a video of me squatting, deadlifting, he would always comment or message something to me just to make sure that I was following all the cues that he's taught me over the years, and all his athletes too that he worked with. Same thing. You could see on their accounts, he'd be commenting them, giving them some modification to work on. But RIP to Tom. For the Highland Games, it's, of course, my coach, Scott Farr. That's probably the person that you were thinking of.
Yep.
Scott Farr, 2-time lightweight world champion, just a phenomenal coach. I mean, it's amazing to see at such a, I can't say young age. He's younger than me, and I know he's younger than you too. And his ability to break down movement, his understanding of the games, and now he's a Highland Games professional. Just a great person, and somebody that I've always leaned on, and I contribute a lot of my success in the Highland Games to him. He helped me go from just being somebody in the 30s rankings to being a top 10 athlete.
Like it. Yeah, I got that one. What can you be found doing when you're not coaching or competing? Like, what are some of your hobbies outside of those two?
The number one is always exercise. I have a very nice home gym that I've assembled over the year of being out here in the Phoenix. So I got my platform. We have 2 spin bikes. I got my Viper Pros. I got my landmine. I have my bench. I have a TRX. I got all types of stuff in there that you probably see in a normal gym. And then the other thing is movies. I really enjoy movies. It's something that my wife and we enjoy doing back when we weren't shut down everywhere. We'd go to a movie at least once or twice a month. We used to be those people that have a movie pass. We actually got rid of it recently. But we watched movies, shows together. It's a way to bond and whatnot. And I'd say that those are probably my 2 biggest hobbies that I really enjoy. And I dabble in things here and there. I like to do car stuff every now and then. But the big ones, movies and exercise.
All right. If you weren't actually doing what you're doing now with KIPS, what do you think you'd be doing as a career? And if you weren't doing Highland games, what would be your sport of choice?
That's a tough one. I think the career choice would probably be something in business. I've thought about that before. And at low points of my career, I thought about making a switch to something non-fitness related. As anybody that's been in the industry more than 2 years knows, it's hard to stay in this industry. It's tough. And especially when you got to make ends meet, pay bills. I thought about a couple of times, switching to just a business or seeing what I could do, but maybe some type of consulting. I've thought about it. I do consulting now for businesses, and maybe expanding that if I wasn't doing KIPS and making education. For Highland Games competing, instead of doing that, maybe I would go back to doing the endurance runs. I don't really enjoy endurance these days, as probably any strength athlete doesn't. But running 10 miles is not probably something on a priority list right now. But maybe, I guess I'd maybe go back to the mud runs. Maybe, I don't know.
All right, well, you can get the long distance out of your mind for this one. You can still be training for Highland Games, but if you had an ideal training day, what's your go-to music or PR song, and then what's your post-training meal look like?
Oh man, so the song, whenever I'm going for a big lift, I do go for more like rock, even though like majority of my session will be either rap or maybe some type of trance or techno music, whatever you want to call it. But usually some type of rock song, whether it's Linkin Park or Metallica, just something that just gets me up there. And that's probably what I listen to each time that I've gone for a big lift over the last few months, whether it's a deadlift or a squat. Post meal, I guess it'd probably be sushi. I love pounding some sushi, pounding some rolls, pounding some salmon, some tuna. I can do that any day.
I like it. All right, so we're gonna go through it. Challenge Caber, last attempt. You need a 12 to win. All right. I know. What's the most valuable piece of advice you've received, and from who?
Most valuable piece of advice. That's a good one. That is a good one. Oh man. It's hard to pick one just because I've had some really great mentors through the year. And I don't want to name drop too big. I would say that maybe more recently, a mentor, somebody that I've leaned on for business advice. It's crazy to say this, but I used to train, and somebody I stay in contact with, he's the president of Dole. And he would just talk to me about how business translates. Business is business. Relationships are relationships. Once you get to a certain level, how you communicate with people, how you interact with them, it becomes the same, whatever industry that you're in. That's probably the best piece of advice I've gotten in the last year. It's really hard to pinpoint one, but he's somebody that's, started from the bottom. He was a salesman at Dole, going from region to region, worked his way all the way up to being the president of the company. And he's somebody that's amazing. I could text him and I'd say, hey, I got something that I'm working on. I need your advice. He'd just be like, call me. And I'd be like, what? I don't want to call you. You're busy. But he's that type of person that he just gives back. He's a great resource, and obviously somebody that knows a lot about business.
I like it. Yeah, that's a great mentor to have. Hey, but I appreciate you coming on the show again, man. And I can't say enough good things. I'm trying to do a little bit of what you've been working on for the last 4.5 years with KIPS, and kind of dabble and dip my toe in the water with all that stuff. And it's awesome to use you as a resource for that, and see all the information you guys are putting out there. I think is awesome. And
Appreciate that.
At the end of the day, hopefully we can throw again soon after this all clears up. But again, man, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been great talking about a lot of these things, especially I'll say talking to a fellow strength coach, about rotational power, the landmine, and all that kind of stuff. Those are things that's been in my mind for quite a bit. But I'll say you don't really, right now, you don't get many opportunities, or I don't, especially with the type of business that I do, to talk about those types of things, despite that being the educational background.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again soon, man.
Definitely.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.